Soldados Veteranos. USD Gem Personalizado. It wasn't the funeral that broke me. Funerals are organized. They have a script. You stand where you're supposed to stand. You wear the black suit that feels a little too tight in the shoulders. You shake hands with people you haven't seen in 10 years, and you nod when they say he was a good man. Because he was. That wasn't a lie. He was a good man. Solid. Dependable. Like the oak tree in the backyard that never seemed to lose its leaves even when the winter got hard. It was the Tuesday after. That's when it hit. The house was empty. The casseroles were gone. The relatives had flown back to their lives, back to the noise of their own families. I was the one left to sort through the quiet. And the quiet in that house was heavy. It wasn't peaceful. It was thick. It felt like it had weight, like you had to push through it just to walk down the hallway. I was in his bedroom. I hadn't spent much time in there when he was alive. That was his space. Even Grandma, God rest her soul, used to say that when he went into that room and closed the door, he wasn't really in the house anymore. He was somewhere else. Somewhere we couldn't follow. We all knew he served. It wasn't a secret. It was just a fact. Like the color of his eyes, or the way he took his coffee black. It was a detail on the surface of him, but he never talked about it. Not once. Growing up, I used to ask him. Every kid does. You see the old photos, the uniform, the sharp angles of a face you barely recognize, and you want the stories. You want the John Wayne version. I'd ask him, Grandpa, what was it like? And the air in the room would change. Every single time. The temperature would drop just a fraction. He wouldn't get angry. He wouldn't yell. He would just disappear. He'd be sitting right there in his armchair, the leather creaking as he shifted his weight, but his eyes would go flat. He'd look at a spot on the wall just over my left shoulder, and he'd say, "It was a long time ago, son. We did what we had to do. That was the wall. And you learned pretty quickly not to try and climb it. You learned that the silence wasn't empty. It was full. It was holding something back, like a dam, holding back a river that would drown us all if it ever broke. So we stopped asking. We let him have his silence. We told ourselves it was dignity. We told ourselves he was just a quiet man from a different generation, but standing there in his bedroom, with the dust motes dancing in the afternoon light, I realized I didn't know him. Not really. I knew the grandfather who carved wooden ducks on the porch. I knew the man who fixed my bicycle chain when I was 12, but I didn't know the man who stared at the wall. I started with the closet. Typical stuff. Flannel shirts. The suit he was buried in was gone, so there was an empty hanger swinging there, clicking against the wood. It made a lonely sound. I packed the clothes into donation bags. It felt wrong, dismantling a life like that, folding a man's existence into plastic garbage bags. Then I got to the nightstand. Just his reading glasses and a half-finished book about the Civil War. He always liked history, maybe because it was safer than the present. I knelt down to check under the bed. I don't know why. Maybe I was looking for a lost slipper. Maybe I was just delaying the moment when I'd have to leave this room and turn off the light for the last time. The carpet was rough under my knees. It smelled like old wool and time. I reached back, sweeping my arm in the dark space underneath. My hand hit something hard. It wasn't cardboard. It felt solid. Wood. Cool to the touch. I pulled it out. It was a box. A wooden footlocker, but smaller. Maybe the size of a toolbox. It was old. The wood was dark, stained by years of handling, the corners worn smooth, there was no dust on it. Think about that. Under the bed, way back against the wall, where the vacuum cleaner never reached, everything else was covered in a fine layer of gray dust. But this box was clean. That meant he pulled it out. That meant he touched it. Recently, maybe often. I sat there on the floor, the box between my legs. The house felt suddenly very large and very quiet. The air felt thin. Like I was using up too much oxygen just by breathing. I stared at the lid. There was no lock. Just a simple metal latch, tarnished and dull. I shouldn't open this. That was my first thought. The instinct was immediate. This is private. This is the part of him he didn't give us. He gave us the Sunday dinners. He gave us the college fund. He gave us the wooden ducks. This, whatever this is, he kept for himself. If he wanted me to see it, he would have left it on the table, he would have told me. But he didn't. He left it under the bed, in the dark, clean, and waiting. My heart was hammering against my ribs. It felt ridiculous. It's just a box. It's probably tax returns from 1985, or old coins. or letters from Grandma before they got married, but my hands were shaking, just a little, because I knew, deep down, it wasn't tax returns. The weight of it was wrong. It felt dense. Not physically heavy, though it had some heft to it. It felt emotionally heavy, like it had its own gravity. I reached out and touched the latch. The metal was cold. It bit into my fingertip. I flipped the latch. It made a sharp snap in the quiet room. The sound seemed to echo, bouncing off the walls too loud. I waited, like I expected him to walk through the door and tell me to stop, to give me that look, the one that said, "That's enough." But nobody came. The house just held its breath. I lifted the lid. The smell hit me first. It wasn't a bad smell, it was just old. It smelled like tobacco, even though he hadn't smoked in 40 years. It smelled of dried paper and oil and something metallic, a sharp copper tang that sat at the back of your throat. I looked inside. It wasn't organized. I expected it to be neat. He was a neat man. His tools in the garage were outlined in marker on the pegboard. His shirts were color-coded. But this was chaos. It looked like someone had just thrown things in there, desperate to get them out of their hands, out of their sight. There were papers scattered on top. Not official documents. Not the discharge papers we had already framed on the hallway wall. These were scraps, notepaper, napkins. The edges were yellowed and brittle. I picked up the first one. It was a map, hand-drawn. The ink was faded, turning that weird brownish purple that old ink turns. It wasn't a map of a whole country. It was a map of a village or a valley. There were lines drawn for ridges, little X marks, and names. Not names of towns, names of people. Miller, Kowalski, Rodriguez. Next to each name was a time. Or 400, or 405. My thumb brushed over the paper. The texture was rough. I put it down, feeling like I was intruding on a conversation I wasn't invited to. I dug a little deeper. There was a lighter, a heavy Zippo, the finish worn down to the brass. I flicked it. Nothing. The flint sparked, a tiny, useless flash in the dim room, but no flame. He had kept a broken lighter for 60 years. Why? Then I saw the photos. They weren't the posed ones. You know the ones I mean. The ones where everyone is clean, uniforms pressed, smiling with their arms around each other before they ship out. The ones that say, "We are ready." These were different. They were small, black and white, blurry. They were candid. Guys sitting on crates, eating out of cans. Guys sleeping in the mud, curled up like children. There was one of a guy shaving using a truck mirror, looking back at the camera with eyes that looked 1,000 years old. I turned the photo over. Jimmy, 2 days before. That was it. Just Jimmy, 2 days before. Before what? I felt a coldness creeping up my arms. The room felt colder than it had a minute ago. I wasn't just looking at pictures. I was looking at ghosts. These were the men he never spoke about. These were the names that never crossed his lips at the dinner table. He had carried them, all this time, while he was teaching me to ride a bike, while he was carving those ducks, while he was sitting in that armchair staring at the wall. He was carrying Jimmy. He was carrying Miller and Kowalski. He had locked them in this box so he could be our grandfather. I should have stopped there. I should have closed the lid and put it back under the bed and let the dead rest. I had seen enough to understand the silence. I understood that the wall wasn't to keep us out. It was to keep this in, to protect us from the weight of it. But I couldn't stop. My hand was moving on its own now, sifting through the layers of his hidden life. There was a small velvet pouch, the kind you get when you buy cheap jewelry. The velvet was worn bald in spots. I picked it up. It rattled. I loosened the drawstring and tipped it into my palm. It wasn't jewelry. It was shrapnel. 3 jagged, ugly pieces of metal. Black, twisted, sharp. They looked evil. Just holding them made my skin crawl. They were heavy for their size. Dense. Why keep this? Why keep the thing that tried to kill you? Or the thing that killed someone else? I put the metal back in the pouch quickly, wiping my hand on my jeans as if the iron could stain me. I was reaching the bottom of the box now. The layer of chaos was thinning out. There was one thing left. It was wrapped in a blue bandana. The cloth was faded, almost gray now, but you could tell it used to be blue. It was folded with care. Unlike the rest of the box, this wasn't thrown in. This was placed. This was the anchor. The way it was wrapped, it looked almost religious, like a relic. I sat there for a long time just looking at that blue bundle. The silence in the house was deafening now. My own breathing sounded loud, ragged. I realized I was sweating. I knew with a certainty that terrified me that whatever was in that bandana was the reason for the box. The rest, the map, the lighter, the photos, that was just the debris. This was the core. This was the source of the silence. I reached out. My fingers brushed the soft, worn fabric. I hesitated, because once I opened this, I couldn't unknow it. I couldn't go back to just thinking of him as the quiet man who liked history. This was going to change the memory of him. I was about to meet the stranger who lived inside my grandfather's skin. I took a breath, held it, and pulled the fabric back. It wasn't gold. It wasn't money. It was a pair of dog tags and a watch. The tags were laced together with a piece of black shoelace, not the standard chain. They didn't jingle. They made a dull clack as they settled into my palm. I didn't need to read the name to know what it said, but I read it anyway. The letters were stamped deep into the metal, uneven and raw. Miller James Jimmy, the guy from the photo, the guy shaving in the truck mirror with the ancient eyes. I held the tags. They felt heavier than steel should feel. They felt dense, like they had absorbed the weight of the man they belonged to. I picked up the watch. It was a standard issue field watch, canvas strap, olive drab, but the glass face was shattered. A spiderweb of cracks focused on the center like it had taken a direct hit against a rock or the ground. The hands were frozen. 04:15. The time written on the map. My throat went tight. A dry, scratching tightness that made it hard to swallow. Beneath the watch, folded into a square so small it was almost hidden in the folds of the bandana, was a letter. This wasn't like the scraps of paper scattered on top. This wasn't a note or a list. This was stationery. Cream-colored paper. The envelope had been opened, the flap tucked inside. There was no stamp. It was addressed to Mrs. Martha Miller. I shouldn't read this. The thought came back, weaker this time. I had already come this far. I had already broken the seal on the tomb. To stop now would be an insult. It would be turning away from the truth he had carried alone for 60 years. I unfolded the letter. The handwriting wasn't the steady, blocky script I knew. The script that wrote checks for my tuition or signed birthday cards with "Love, Grandpa." This handwriting was shaky, jagged. The ink was uneven, like the pen had been pressed down too hard, tearing into the fiber of the paper. I read the first line. "Dear Mrs. Miller," then a lot of crossed-out words. Huge blocks of ink where he had started a sentence, panicked, and scrubbed it out. "I am writing to tell you," crossed out. "I need you to know that," crossed out. I skipped down to the only paragraph that survived the ink. I was supposed to be on point. Jimmy took it. He said I looked tired. He said he'd take the first watch. It was 04 Mao. I let him. I went to sleep. I shouldn't have slept. If I had been awake, I would have seen them. I would have seen the wire. It should have been me, Mrs. Miller. It was supposed to be me walking that line. I came home. He didn't. I don't know how to apologize for being the one who is still breathing. The letter ended there. No signature, just blank space. The silence in the room wasn't just heavy anymore. It was crushing. I looked at the date on the top of the letter. It was dated 2 weeks after he got back. He had sat at a table, maybe in this very house, maybe in this very room, and tried to confess. He tried to tell a mother that her son died because he was kind, because he took a shift he didn't have to take, but he never sent it. He couldn't. How do you send that? How do you tell a woman that her son is dead because you were tired? So he kept it. He kept the tags. He kept the watch frozen at the moment his life changed from a life to a debt. I looked around the room. The dresser, the empty bed, the window looking out over the lawn he mowed every Saturday at 9 a.m. sharp. Everything made sense now. The silence, the distance. He wasn't cold. He was frozen. He was stuck at 4:15. Every breath he took for the last 60 years, he felt like he was stealing it. Every time he laughed, every time he saw a sunset, every time he held me as a baby. A voice in the back of his head whispered, "This isn't yours. This belongs to Jimmy." That's why he never told stories. How could he? In his mind, he wasn't a hero. He was a thief. He was living a life that was supposed to end in a valley on the other side of the world. The wall wasn't pride. It was penance. He lived a good life. He was a good father, a good husband. He worked hard. He never complained. But he did it all with a ghost standing right behind him. He lived for two men. He had to be good enough for both of them. And that weight, God, the weight of that. I looked down at the box. This wasn't just a collection of souvenirs, it was an altar. It was the only place in the world where he allowed himself to be the scared kid who made a mistake. The only place where he could say Jimmy's name. I carefully folded the letter. I tried to fold it exactly along the old creases, respecting the pattern he had made. I wrapped the watch and the tags back in the blue bandana. It felt like wrapping a wound. I put everything back. The shrapnel, the photos, the broken lighter, the map. I closed the lid. The latch clicked. A small, final sound. I pushed the box back under the bed, back into the dark, back where he wanted it. I sat there for a long time as the sun went down. The room turned gray, then blue, then black. I didn't turn on the lamp. I thought about taking the box with me. I thought about showing my dad, look, this is why he was the way he was. But I didn't. That box wasn't for us. He didn't leave it for us to find. He just couldn't bear to throw it away. He couldn't throw Jimmy away. I stood up. My knees popped. The sound was loud in the empty house. I walked to the door. I looked back at the bed one last time. It looked different now. It didn't look like just a piece of furniture. It looked like a guard post. He stood watch. For 60 years, he stood watch over that memory. He never let it go. He never let himself forget. That was his service. That was his sacrifice. I walked out into the hallway and closed the door. I didn't tell anyone. I never told my dad. I never told my cousins. When we sold the house, I came back one last time. I went into the room. I reached under the bed. I took the box. It sits in my closet now, on the top shelf, behind the winter coats. I don't open it. I don't need to. I know what's in there. I know the cost of the silence now. And sometimes when the house is quiet and I can't sleep, I think about the men who come home, and the parts of them that don't. I think about the boxes under the beds, the things we carry that have no names. He carried it as far as he could. Now, I'll carry it a little while, so he can finally rest. If you're carrying something today that feels too heavy to speak about, if you know the weight of a silence that others mistake for peace, you are not invisible. We see you. Stand watch with us. Type respect in the comments to honor the story of the men who carry the ghost so the rest of us don't have to. I'll see you on the next watch.